my sister said. You're a joke, you'll never afford a house. And everyone laughed. I stayed quiet. 2 years later I invited them over, and they couldn't believe what they saw. It was supposed to be just another Saturday. You know the kind. A family get-together with lukewarm lasagna, wine that tastes suspiciously like vinegar, and everyone pretending not to hate each other until the dessert tray hits the table. We were in my parents' living room. Half the family sprawled out on couches, half hovering near the kitchen counter, picking at appetizers like seagulls at a boardwalk. And I made the mistake of opening my mouth. So, I said, trying not to sound too eager, I've been thinking about finally buying a place. Just a small house, nothing fancy. Maybe something with a little yard, someplace I can grow into. It was meant to be hopeful. A quiet declaration of intention. But no one looked up. Until my sister, Madison, laughed. Loud. Sharp. Like a gunshot in a quiet room. You, she said, eyes already gleaming. You're a joke. You'll never afford a house. And like that, the room cracked open. Everyone laughed. My uncles chuckled. My aunt nearly choked on her wine. Even my dad smirked behind his glass, shaking his head like I'd just announced I was going to build a rocket ship with duct tape. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting the laughter roll over me. I could have defended myself. Thrown back a sarcastic remark, reminded them of the sacrifices they didn't see. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the shame like it was water and nodded like it didn't cut. But inside, something snapped. I didn't show it on my face. That's the thing with years of quiet humiliation, you learn to wear indifference like a second skin. But as the room swelled with jokes at my expense, something in me went silent. Not broken. Just done. Done seeking their approval. Done playing the role of the harmless, forgettable one. That night, when I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't vent to a friend. I just sat at my kitchen table with the lights off and thought. All right. Game on. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had somewhere to be, but because I couldn't sleep. That moment, my sister's voice, the laughter, the way no one stood up for me, looped in my head like some cruel, homegrown horror film. And by morning, I was already deep in thought, not about what happened, but about what I was going to do. I opened a blank page on my laptop and titled it The House Plan. I wasn't even sure what that meant yet, but I knew it wasn't going to be just a dream anymore. I started with my job, corporate desk work, nothing glamorous, but stable. Then I listed my expenses, my debts, every leak in my financial ship. It was ugly. But not impossible. That was the first revelation. I didn't need to win the lottery or wait for someone to rescue me. I needed to overhaul everything. Rent had to go. Eating out had to go. Streaming subscriptions gone. Nights out? History. I deleted every distraction from my phone that morning, social media, gaming apps, even news alerts. I didn't want to hear about anyone else's life. I was building mine. Then came the second piece, the side hustle. I had a degree in graphic design I never really used. So I dusted off old skills and started freelancing. Nights and weekends were no longer rest time. They were work time. I built logos in silence. I drafted marketing kits for small startups. I sold printable planners and resume templates. I didn't talk about it to anyone. I didn't brag or post #grindset quotes. I just vanished. My friends noticed first. You good, man? They'd text. I'd lie. Yeah, just keeping busy. What I didn't say was that I'd moved into a studio apartment so small, I had to fold my mattress up every morning just to walk around. I lived like a ghost. No parties. No dinners. No updates. While they gossiped and drank and posted filtered pictures of their cozy life, I was working. Silently. Relentlessly. And every time I wanted to quit, I'd remember Madison's voice. You're a joke. You'll never afford a house. Good. Let that echo keep me hungry. The hardest part wasn't the sacrifice. It was pretending nothing had changed. My family kept up the usual routines, cookouts, birthdays, holiday gatherings. I showed up when I had to, smiled when expected, and kept my mouth shut. They had no idea I was pulling 16-hour days between my full-time job and freelance work. They didn't know I was skipping meals, living off coffee, or falling asleep with my laptop open on the kitchen table. They thought I was just the same old me. And I let them. Why give them the satisfaction of watching me struggle? They already believed I'd fail. I decided to starve them of updates. No hints, no glimpses, nothing they could mock or dissect. If they wanted a show, they'd have to wait for the finale. Meanwhile, I tracked every dollar. Every freelance gig went straight into savings. Every time I felt tempted to spend, I asked myself, would I rather have takeout tonight or a house tomorrow? You'd be amazed how motivating it is to remember being laughed at by the people you once hoped would cheer for you. The real test came about a year in. Madison got engaged. Big party, huge guest list, everyone buzzing about it like she'd cured cancer. I showed up because not going would raise eyebrows. But when I walked in, I noticed something strange. She looked at me. Longer than usual. Not out of warmth, just confusion. Like she couldn't quite place what was different. I was dressed a little sharper. I'd gained a quiet confidence from all the late nights and small wins. She asked, "Still chasing that house?" I smiled. "Something like that." She laughed again. "Well, good luck. Interest rates are insane." I didn't say anything. Just lifted my glass and toasted quietly to her doubt. The best revenge is letting someone think you're still behind, right up until you pass them. 649 days. That's how long it took. Not that I was counting. But I was. Every single day, I marked an X on the wall calendar above my desk. It started as a habit, a way to stay disciplined. Then it became something else. A ritual. A silent promise. And on day 649, I cashed in that promise. It was a Tuesday when I got the call. The loan had been approved. All documents signed. The keys were waiting. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. I didn't cry. I just sat there, phone still warm in my hand, staring at the wall of excess. One for every early morning, every skipped outing, every time I said no when it would have been so easy to say yes. That weekend, I walked through the front door of my house. It wasn't just nice, it was stunning. Modern but warm. High ceilings, dark wood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that opened to a view that didn't even look real. Mountains in the distance, quiet roads, birds instead of traffic. The kitchen gleamed. The backyard had enough space for things I'd never allowed myself to imagine. A dog, a garden, maybe even one of those hammocks you only ever see in catalogs. I slept on the floor that first night. No bed. Just a blanket, a full heart, and silence. It was perfect. But I wasn't finished yet. Because this story didn't start with a dream, it started with a sentence. A voice. A laugh. I hadn't forgotten. And now it was time. I sent out a text the following Thursday. "Hey, I've got something to show you. Come by Saturday at 4. No details. No address. Just the invite. They all said yes. Of course they did. Saturday came cloaked in late autumn gold, the kind of day that makes everything feel important. Like the world itself knew something was about to change. I stood in front of the house, calm, collected, and waiting. I'd spent the morning making sure everything was spotless. Not staged, just ready. The lawn had been freshly trimmed. The driveway clean. Every light in the house glowed warm and inviting, casting long, elegant shadows against stone and steel. At 3:58, the first car pulled up. It was my sister Madison, of course. Perfectly punctual, her hair done just right, wearing sunglasses even though the sun was already dipping behind the hills. She stepped out of her SUV, looked around, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, said nothing. Behind her, more cars arrived. My parents. My aunt and uncle. A couple of cousins who had always ridden the fence between support and snide curiosity. They all wore that same half-smile of polite confusion, the kind people wear when they're not sure if they're arriving at a miracle or a mistake. I greeted them with a smile and a simple, "Glad you came." Then I stepped aside and motioned toward the house. "Go ahead," I said. "It's mine." There was a beat, maybe two, of complete silence. Then my mom let out a little breathy, "Oh," and walked inside. My dad followed, trying to hide the way his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Madison lingered outside for a second longer, eyes sweeping over the facade like she was trying to find the flaw. There wasn't one. Inside, they moved like tourists. My cousin Matt walked through the kitchen twice just to trace the marble countertop. My uncle muttered something about the vaulted ceilings being impressive for a first home. My dad stood at the sliding glass doors and stared at the view, the endless stretch of trees and hills, touched by fire-colored leaves, reaching all the way to the horizon. Madison walked the perimeter of the living room like she was casing the place, heels clicking on hardwood. "So," she said finally, "you actually bought this?" I nodded. 2 years. Hard work. No magic. She didn't laugh. That was the first real surprise of the day. The second came when she said, "I mean, good for you, I guess." I just smiled. Not smug. Not bitter. Just a quiet, measured nod. The kind of smile you give when you've already won. For the next 20 minutes, they tried their best to adjust. To make small talk. To piece together how someone they had dismissed, mocked, could have done what they hadn't. Compliments came slow and stiff. "This view is incredible. You did all this on your own. Looks like someone finally figured it out." Every word a backpedal. They stayed just long enough to feel awkward. Then, as the sun began to slip behind the hills and the air cooled, I walked them to the door one by one. No hugs. No warmth. Just calm, polite silence. And just before Madison stepped outside, I handed her a small folded note. She looked at it, confused, but didn't open it until she was already halfway down the driveway. I watched her stop. Then stand still for a long, long moment. She read the note once. Then again. Her expression never changed, but she didn't look back either. I knew what she saw written there, in my own handwriting. "You were right. I couldn't afford a house. Back when I cared what any of you thought." She got in her car without a word. And I closed the door. The moment the door clicked shut, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the usual silence after company leaves, that lingering echo of voices and footsteps. No. This was cleaner. Heavier. Like something had finally left the room that had been living there rent-free for years. I didn't move at first. I stood in the entryway and stared at the door, wondering if any of them would knock again. Come back. Say something that would change things. But they didn't. Not a single one. I watched from the window as their cars pulled away, one by one. My mother craning her neck for a last look. My father staring straight ahead. And Madison, who didn't even glance in the mirror. That was the moment I realized I wasn't sad. I should have been, right? This was my family. These were the people who'd raised me, who'd watched me grow, who had shared Christmas mornings and summer road trips and birthdays filled with cheap cake and forced smiles. But as their tail lights disappeared down the hill, I felt only clarity. They were never going to change. And more importantly, I didn't need them to. All those years I spent trying to earn their approval, all the holidays where I kept my mouth shut, the phone calls I waited for, the praise I hoped for, it had been a waste. Not because I hadn't deserved those things, but because I had been seeking them from people who were never capable of giving them. They couldn't see me. Not really. Not the way I saw myself now. So I turned away from the window, walked barefoot across the warm hardwood, and sat in the living room. The sun had dipped just below the hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The house glowed with that soft, amber light that only comes at the end of a long, honest day. I closed my eyes. Took a breath. And finally let myself feel it, not pride, not triumph, not revenge. Peace. I wasn't looking to prove anything anymore. I had nothing left to explain. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I think what struck me most that night wasn't the silence. It was how natural it felt. I wandered through the house, barefoot, room to room, touching the edges of everything I had once thought was impossible. The polished surfaces, the crown molding, the soft dim of the recessed lighting. I had memorized this place on the listing photos months ago, obsessing over every angle like it was a dream I wasn't allowed to touch. But now it was real. And it was mine. They'd never understand the full weight of what that meant. Because they'd never seen the worst of it. They didn't know about the nights I went to bed hungry because a grocery run would set me back too far. They never saw the cracked ceiling of the shoebox apartment I lived in while I worked 2 jobs and freelanced until my fingers went numb. They never saw the spreadsheet on my wall, or the post-it notes stuck to my bathroom mirror with goals I whispered to myself like prayers. They just saw me as the one who talked too big. They saw a joke. But here's the thing about being underestimated: you get to work in the dark. You get to build quietly, without expectations. And when the time comes, you get to show them not who you were, but who they never saw coming. I poured myself a glass of water. No champagne. No victory dance. Just water and quiet. Madison had always thought success was loud. Flashy. Something to show off in filtered selfies with hashtags and humble brags. She never understood the kind that grows slowly, day by day, in the corners of your life, until it stands tall enough to cast a shadow you no longer have to step out from. By midnight, I had settled on the couch. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't scroll my phone. I just sat there, hands folded, watching the stars blink through the glass. And for the first time, the thought that kept me awake wasn't worry. It was possibility. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, not out of habit, but out of instinct. The sun hadn't even touched the horizon yet, and the house was still wrapped in shadows. I sat up slowly, the hardwood cool beneath my feet, and let the silence greet me like an old friend. I didn't have anywhere to be. No clock chasing me. No boss breathing down my neck, no emails needing replies. Not anymore. Because that was the final piece. I'd quit my job the week before. Not out of spite. Not even out of celebration. I just didn't need it. The house wasn't just a trophy. It was proof that I could build something on my own terms. And that meant letting go of the things that never served me. But you don't become free without bleeding for it. And that's what people like Madison never understood. She thought I'd disappeared out of shame. That I'd fallen off the map because I couldn't handle life. She never imagined that while she was laughing at my dreams, I was calculating interest rates. She didn't know that while she was spending Saturdays at rooftop bars, I was on my living room floor, teaching myself tax code and late-night coding boot camps. And while they were drinking, gossiping, scrolling, spending, I was becoming someone they'd never recognize. But the cost? It was steep. I lost friends. Not because they were bad people, but because they wanted the old version of me, the one who'd show up and laugh at the right jokes and never talk too much about goals or ambition. When I stopped playing that role, they quietly backed away. I stopped dating. Not out of bitterness, but because I knew I couldn't give anyone the version of myself that deserved love until I loved the version I was building. There were nights when the only voice I heard was my own. And mornings where the weight of the sacrifice almost crushed me before I even got out of bed. But every time I wavered, I'd hear her voice again. You're a joke. You'll never afford a house. Like a compass made of contempt, it pointed me forward. And now? Now I don't need that voice anymore. Now I wake up and the voice in my head is mine. It says, you did it. Quietly. Completely. Without permission. I walked into the kitchen and opened the windows wide. The early light slid in like a promise, warm and full of color. Birds were already up, busy with their morning chaos. I stood there and let the breeze wash over me, carrying the scent of earth, dew, and something else. Freedom. That's what no one tells you about success. It's not loud. It doesn't arrive with applause. It doesn't feel like a firework. It feels like still water. You look around one day and realize that every chain you've been dragging behind you is gone. And all that weight? You carried it right into your new life. By the end of that first week, I had gone fully silent. No texts. No calls. No check-ins. My phone stayed face down unless it was business. Even then, the only people who had my number were those who spoke my language: builders, buyers, doers. Not one person from my family made the cut. I got an email from my mom 3 days after the visit. The subject line just read, "Let's talk." I didn't open it. There was nothing left to talk about. They'd said everything they needed to say 2 years ago, and they said it in the way they laughed, the way they dismissed me, the way their eyes glazed over the moment I showed even a spark of ambition. That's the funny thing about people who claim to love you unconditionally. They never expect the conditions to change. I'd outgrown them. All of them. That house, my house, became more than just a monument to my effort. It became a filter. A fortress. The moment they stepped inside and saw what I'd built, it held a mirror up to each of them. Some tried to pretend they were proud. Others said little at all. And then there was Madison, who couldn't hide the fact that her carefully curated world just cracked at the seams. She never responded to the note I gave her. Not that I expected her to. She was too busy spinning the story, I imagine, recasting herself as the sister who always motivated me, who always knew I had it in me. I've heard she tells people she's the reason I turn things around. I don't correct the narrative. I don't speak to them. Not anymore. Because this story didn't end with a lesson learned, or a tearful reunion. There was no hug at the door, no epiphany, no healing circle where we all learned to love each other better. It ended exactly where it was supposed to. With the door closed behind them. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I just needed distance, and I finally had it. That was the plan all along. The house is still quiet. Not empty, just peaceful. It's filled with things that matter. A worn leather chair by the window. A coffee mug with no matching set. Books with pages dog-eared from nights I actually had time to read. Sometimes I catch myself standing in the hallway, just smiling. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I proved myself right. They'll never understand what I built, and that's fine. They weren't meant to. Because the life I was chasing? It was never for them. It was for me. And now that I have it, they can keep their laughter. I'll keep the keys.